Hi and welcome back to the channel, and in today's episode let's keep going with our Legacy B4 build. Just putting the finishing touches on a new braided clutch line to go in place of the factory hard line and rubber line in there. It's a common upgrade that we do because the rubber lines tend to get a bit worn with time, and then they bulge and they can split, and we don't want that taking us out of a rally. Saturday morning, only a couple of days before Christmas, and still going flat out on this car trying to get it done. I've got the camera on the opposite side just so that I've got some room to work here. It's probably not that easy to see. However, the fuel line, the pressure line is in. Ran out of braided line to get the return line done, so that'll have to be done. I've ordered it, so we'll see when that comes in. Probably going to be into the new year now, not a major drama. All the holes are cut and all the fittings are already on there for that. So anyway, that's sorted. Onto the brake lines now. I've already got the line run through to the master cylinder. I'm doing the rear circuit. Now in this particular car, I know we've done brake lines a few times on the channel, and one of the things that we normally do is put in a hydraulic handbrake. In this car we're not. The customer wants to retain the standard handbrake, and there's nothing wrong with that. It has to do with the centre differential that's in the transmission, and we've talked about this a few times in the past, but it's got a mechanical 20 kilo centre diff in there, which means a hydraulic handbrake's really not that effective anyway. You're not really able to use the handbrake at all to get the car around the corner. You have to learn to drive the car a bit differently. With that, it's a kind of a more old school mechanical way of doing it rather than the more conventional or newer electronic centre differentials. But anyway, it does a job and it'll work perfectly well. There's no problem with them whatsoever. However, because all the brake lines have been removed from the car, and that includes the factory brake biasing valve, which is normally fitted up front, we will need to fit an aftermarket bias valve in there. So brackets been sorted for that already and made up. So it's a matter of getting this line here that I've already got run through and terminating that in here, and then continuing that to the rear to a T, and then to the rear calipers, and also doing the front. Now what I need to do to begin with is these bias valves come with brass fittings in them, adapters, and these are designed specifically to allow the connection of a double flared fitting, say something you'd find on like a brake hard line on a steel line or something like that. We're using braided lines, so we don't need those. So instead, trusty airflow fittings. Again, probably not that easy to see in the camera. However, these are designed so that we can put these into the bias valve and then hook our braided lines up and connect those straight up to this. Now there are a couple of ways that you can put braided lines in or fittings into cars. I like to use this stuff for these type of fittings, and generally speaking you don't need to use a sealant on the airflow fittings at all. However, with this particular type of fitting I like to just put some thread sealant, so I will use this stuff in there. I've had a couple of these get an occasional weep in them just because of the way that they tighten up, and I don't want that weeping. Obviously we don't want any leaks in the system. Bit further along, and that is the brake bias valve sorted out and the plumbing to the rear of the car all done. Now the customer already had some of the rear brake plumbing done, so we were able to connect onto that. At the moment this is only loosely cable tied. We'll sort that out. We've still got a fuel return line to put in once some more braided line arrives for that, and then that will be the fuel lines and all the brake lines plumbed to the rear of the car. Now to get on and do the front lines. You know you live in Australia when? Yes, that is correct. The temperature is 43 degrees at the moment, and it is still climbing. We're supposed to get to 44 today, and it is the day before Christmas Eve. Haven't filmed a lot of work today because it's just been dripping sweat everywhere. Got the fans running in the workshop, but it's still very, very warm. Alright, just a quick update. The brake lines are all done now, so all braided lines are in.
to the front wheels, and they are all plumbed in and sorted out. And this is what it looks like at the business end. Not overly exciting really, just a braided hose terminated on a caliper. Sumitomo 4-pot calipers, which are what are fitted to the WRX. And also we have to change these brake pads out, different pads, brand and compound. They'll go in, and then the last thing to do will be to bleed up the braking system, and that will be that all sorted out. All right, off camera I have just finished fitting the factory airbox back into the car. The customer opted to use that rather than the pod filter. It does have a aftermarket element in it. It's an oiled element. I think this one's a uni filter element that's gone in there, and so we'll reuse this assembly. One thing to note here is the airflow meter is molded into the airbox assembly. We won't be reusing that airflow meter. That's going to be removed out of the system in terms of wiring at least, but it can just sit in there. It won't do any harm. We did make a modification though, and it's this. This is called a resonance chamber. It sits underneath the air filter, and in this particular car it sits just in front of the front right wheel. It's quite common, lots of cars have these. The idea behind it is to reduce the induction noise, so the air noise rushing into the engine. Obviously not required in a rally car. We've removed it for two reasons. One, we don't want it to fill up with mud and water because it could make quite a heavy weight there, so it's extra weight. But more importantly, it's got to do with being in front of the front wheels. We don't want anything hanging down near the wheels that could potentially be damaged. You know, whether it be rocks and stones, or there have been cases in rally cars in the past, they've used a factory air filter assembly and a flat tyre. The tyre delaminates and part of the rubber goes around, swings around, and then rips this clean off the bottom of the air filter or does damage to the airbox. And then the next thing you know, you've got dusty air or potentially muddy water getting into the engine, and it has caused engine failures. So if we take that out of the equation, then there's no chance of it being damaged. And basically this hole here where it goes on the bottom of the air filter has been blanked off and sealed. So that's that. So this is an interesting one. I touched on it a few episodes ago when we first started on this car, and it's not one I've fitted before, so I'm going to have a go at fitting this shortly. This looks like a muffler. It, however, is not. This is actually for the induction. So basically this part here goes onto the factory throttle body, and this goes around to the air filter, so it sits at the back of the engine. It's a very interesting design. I've not seen one of these before or fitted one of these before. Apparently they're very good for the six-cylinder engine. They help out a lot with getting the induction right, because apparently it can affect torque and power figures. So it's quite a common thing. They're used quite a lot in New Zealand. So I have to read the instructions, and which good. They look like they're in Japanese. Yeah, good. That'll make it easy to read. Good. Anyway, so I'll check that out and then start fitting that. So a bit of off-camera mucking around to get this all in. Another kit that's supposed to be a direct bolt-on that not quite. To be fair, the plenum all went together without too much drama. That just goes on, the bracket goes down to the correct place, and they supply a much longer bolt to pick up this. There's a spacer in there, and then it goes through the bolt for the starter motor. That all went together, no dramas. Just a tiny bit of adjustment with the hose clamps and mucking around, so that was pretty cool. However, this part here, the customer has gone for the optional S-bend in lieu of the factory intake pipe, and this is where the fun began. This pipe is really not got the right angles on it. It's also too short, and the silicon joiners, the flexible sections, are also too short. To add to that, none of these pipe ends anywhere have got a bead rolled on them, so they haven't got a ridge to lock the pipe into place. Really the best solution to this would have been not too much of a drama here, but certainly here and the S-bend itself could do with longer silicon hoses, probably another 10 or 20 mil, just to get a bit more purchase on there and grip it properly and allow some mucking around if you're going to continue using this pipe, which isn't quite the correct angles. As it is now, these clamps are really just clinging on right to the end of the stainless steel pipes. So I've tightened them up as much as I dare just to get some purchase on it. However, it is possibly going to be an issue. It'll have to be very carefully managed and put back together again in a rally should the air filter need to be removed and washed or replaced for some reason, because if these are not put back in the right place, then the pipe could easily leak and the clamps won't seat it. The other thing is as well that I was spent a fair bit of time on trying to get this right, was to get some clearance between this pipe and the manifold. It pretty much was touching, and I had to keep rotating the pipe and fooling around and loosening and tightening the clamps. So that is going to be a little bit of a drama in service if a air filter needs to be removed for some reason. It's just going to have to take a bit of care with that. Whilst I was at it, I needed to fit the air temp sensor in somewhere, and initially I was thinking about putting it here or here somewhere, which we would do on a turbocharged car. However, it doesn't make a great deal of difference in a naturally aspirated car, and it was easier in the end to fit it into the factory airbox, so just behind the airflow meter. This airflow meter is doing nothing, like I said earlier, and the wiring that did go to the airflow meter will be cut and modified so that we can plug it into the air temp sensor. Right, that couple of hours has resulted in, it looks pretty flash, in a stainless steel intake plenum. Cool. Let's have a chat about the fuel system, particularly at the engine end, as we've already covered all of the other end of the car. Righto, so what we've got is our inline fuel filter sorted out now and mounted to the firewall in a bracket, and that is ready to go. That's a pressure line here that will go to our fuel injectors, and up here is our return line. Now the Subaru, this model, the Liberty, uses a unique fuel system, and it is basically a dead end system, which might sound a bit odd given the way that the fuel lines are set up. But basically, if we look here at the fuel rails, there is no return or no end on this. So basically there's a rail on this side for this bank of cylinders, and same on the other side of the engine. And basically they're only pressure fed. There's no return line. There's no way of sending the fuel back to the tank via these fuel rails. And that's quite common these days with modern cars, modern fuel injected engines, where they have a dead end system. This one differs slightly though, because Subaru have decided that what they would do is they would run the pressure line in, and that would end up at the fuel rails. However, they would also have a return line, and in here would be a fuel pressure regulator of sorts and a fuel dampening system. And the missing link in that puzzle is this piece here. This is a combination fuel pressure regulator and fuel dampener in one. So basically the high pressure fuel would have come in here. This is the fuel pressure regulator. It goes through this gadget if needed. This is a fuel dampener underneath, and it would return back to the tank. So it was quite possible that fuel would come up all the way from the tank, go through this, and then return to the tank without actually going to the engine. And this side here would go through to the engine to pressurize the fuel rails. Now these things, so the rumour has it, are not the most reliable. They do give trouble, particularly in a performance type setup, and we definitely don't want that. And being that we've upgraded the fuel pump and all the other bits and pieces in the fuel system, we definitely don't want to have an issue with this. On top of that, hopefully the camera will pick this up. I don't know if you can see there's a screw or some sort of fitting that's missing off of the bottom of this. Somewhere along the line before we got the car, this has gone awry, and don't know what that does or what that's supposed to be set to and what effect that's going to have on the fuel pressure. So this is now a suspect item, and we don't want to put this in and then have fuel pressure problems which result in some sort of engine damage. So this unit will not be going back in the car. So this is really the part we're interested in. It is a aftermarket fuel pressure regulator. This one's a Raceworks brand. There's a few different types on the market. So basically what will happen is that the high pressure fuel will come in here. The fuel will exit and go into the fuel injection rails from this side here, and this side here is the return port that will return to the tank. It also has a vacuum port on it, so it'll be connected up to the manifold for vacuum reference. Won't make a lot of difference in this because it's not a turbocharged car. We'll connect it anyway. And on top we have the ability here to adjust the fuel pressure. So we'll put a fuel pressure gauge on there and set that fuel pressure correctly, so static fuel pressure basically, and that will then allow us to make sure that we've got everything all set up correctly. Through the magic of television, the fuel pressure regulator is now plumbed in. I had to make up a new bracket for it. The bracket that was supplied with it, I probably could have made that fit, but it wouldn't really work that well. So it's just easier to make up a new aluminium bracket for it and fix that in. It's all sorted. Got to wait for a new port to come. They've sent me the wrong size port for some reason. Anyway, last thing to do on this fuel pressure regulator is to get rid of this not flash looking vacuum hose. It's quite common in these older cars, particularly in the cars where they get a hell of a lot of heat under the engine bay. For the factory rubber hoses, particularly vacuum lines, to go very stiff and brittle, and they crack and break. I've seen them go so hard they're like hardened plastic, and they just crack and fall off. So we don't want a problem with that. So instead, we'll use a brand new silicone hose on here. With these engines having a plastic manifold on them, you've also got to be very careful with these manifolds. I mean, this thing is now 20 years old, and if you put too much stress, too much pressure, or force it, you could crack the manifold as well. So just got to be a little bit careful with working with these older cars these days, just to make sure that you don't end up with a drama somewhere that you don't need it. Last thing I don't have to do is pull the manifold off as well and have to change that out because it's cracked. So what's going to end this video a little bit earlier, however, a quick change of plans. So basically all the wiring loom in the car is the basics of it is pretty much sorted now. It has been a lengthy process. If I'm honest, the Subaru engineers made things overly complicated with the wiring, and to undo some of that and change some of that and get it in the right places has been challenging at times. It's been a bit of nutting out what they've done and how they've put it together and then got it all right. Have been working across 5 or 6 different sort of charts and tables and sheets of paper, which has been interesting to transfer things over from one to the other. Don't know whether the camera will pick that up, but there's lots and lots of wires that we've cut off that are redundant or not used in the system. We've got to go through and tape those up and insulate them all before we wrap the loon up. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that we've had to do as well, like put in a separate fuel pump relay. That had to go in because the car had a fuel pump controller in the back that kind of worked like a relay that was controlled by the ECU, but it was basically power going one way and signals coming the other way back to the ECU, and that's just not required for running the setup we're running. So we've simplified all that and got all that sorted out now. There was some pretty odd stuff that the ECU managed or took care of that we've got out of the system that the Link ECU doesn't need to be worried about, or certainly not in the same fashion that the factory ECU was. I guess it's just the wiring for the time. Anyway, so now we're down to hopefully plugging the ECU in, dropping in a configuration file into it, and it should be good to go. We're still going to need to get some fuel and test the fuel pump and a few other bits and pieces first to make sure that all that wiring is working, and then once we know, we're confident that everything is sorted out properly, then we will be on to mounting up the ECU, and we can then wrap all of this loom up, and that includes all the way to the back of the car and whatever, and be confident that the engine is going to run. Right, setting the fuel pressure. I've already done this now, however I'll explain how it works. It's pretty straightforward. So using one of these gadgets, it is a fuel pressure gauge, and it's just got a dial gauge there to allow us to see how much fuel pressure is.
In this car, it's quite straightforward to set the fuel pressure, because all that needs to happen is instead of having the pressure line running to the rails because they're a dead end or a dead head type system, instead the fuel pressure regulator goes in here instead, and that will tell us how much pressure the fuel pump is sending to the system, to the injectors. So being an adjustable fuel pressure reg, it's just a matter of turning this up or down. In this case, I had to turn it up to get the fuel pressure to what we wanted. It was around about 30 from the factory, and we needed to get that up to about 43, 45, which is quite similar to what the WRX fuel pressure is. So it's just a matter of winding that up until the gauge reads correctly and then lock it off. Got to, of course, do that with the fuel pump running. So in the software, just enable the fuel pump to run with fuel in the tank. And also that gives us a chance to check and make sure that we've got no leaks. We had a couple of tiny weeps, one from the there's a port on the side of the fuel pressure regulator here where you can fit a fuel pressure gauge or a fuel pressure sensor. We're not fitting one of those in this case, so I just had to seal that port off. Everything else has come up good, which means we can now confidently close up the hatches to the fuel tank and know all the wiring and everything's all correct, and happy days. A very short video there of the engine running. Yes, we've got it sorted now. There was a lot of electrical anomalies to sort out, and we've discovered a few more that will be in a future video that we'll talk about. It was running lumpily there. A couple of settings in the ECU that we needed to tinker with. Also, we didn't run the engine for very long because we hadn't got coolant in it at that stage, so we had to sort that out. When we filled it up with coolant, there was a couple of leaks that we needed to get on top of as well. So in a future video, we'll show it running, and everything will be cool. Alright, that's it for this episode. Hope you've enjoyed our progress on the Legacy B4 build. Please like, give us a thumbs up, it's important for the YouTube algorithm, and subscribe, and we'll catch you again soon. Cheers.